The Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers.
My name is Louis Frumkes. I'm the director of the Writing Center here at Hunter. And there are several writing centers, but we're the one that encourages creative writing and puts on speaking events and things like that. So I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, and he's going to talk to you for a while about writing, and when he is done, you are more than welcome. He's very happy to answer questions. He loves to answer questions. And then we have refreshments and a book signing. And there you have it, right? So, to everyone who dreams of being well published, this is what you should do. Grow up in Minsk, Belarus, and emigrate to the United States as soon as you can. 8 is a good age. Take a degree at Princeton University in Russian literature and get an MFA in fiction from NYU for good measure. Then join the editorial staff of the New Yorker magazine. Surround yourself with appropriate residencies and fellowships, and then publish journalism, essays, and criticism in the said New Yorker, the New York Times Book Review, the Times Magazine, the New Republic, the Nation, and the London Review of Books. It is now time to unveil your first novel. Make sure that it gets a rave review on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. That creates a lot of buzz. Is selected as one of the 100 notable books of the year, is a Barnes & Noble Discover Great Writers pick, and wins a few prestigious awards, such as the American Library Association's Sophie Brody Award, the Sami Rohr Prize, and the Edward Lewis Wallant Award. Having done that and developed an ardent following of readers, you may now encourage your current publisher, Harper & Collins, to prepare your second novel for release, probably sometime next year in the spring. Ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to present a writer who followed my instructions to a T. Please welcome Boris Fishman, author of The Replacement Life, as the Hunter Writing Center's best-selling author this evening. Boris?
Hi, everyone. I followed Louis's instructions to a T, but in an Oedipal move, I must correct him on a couple of things. I was a finalist for the Sami Rohr Prize and a finalist for the Edward Lewis Wallant Award, but not a winner. I did win the ALA Award. I'm a former fact checker, so professionally necessary to. Can't. And the other thing that's absolutely false is how linear Louis made that sound. He made it sound as if I knew exactly what I was going to do from a young age and just went ahead and did it. But no, it was anything but a linear path. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But maybe you can steer me a bit. This is the novel, A Replacement Life. In a sentence, it's about a young man, a failed writer, who starts forging Holocaust restitution claims for old Russian Jews in South Brooklyn. And it came out last summer in hardcover. It came out in paperback in late January. And I have done about 60 or 70 readings on its behalf. I just flew in from the latest set yesterday. And if I never read from this book again, it will be too soon, you know? So with your permission, I will not read to you from the book tonight unless you insist on a page or so. I would much rather, because this is the Writing Center, I came here excited to talk about the career of it, such as it is, and the very bumpy, potholy way to a place like this. But maybe you can steer me and let me know what you're interested in. Let's not stand on ceremony. If anyone has any questions or opinions or interjections, don't be shy. Come forth. Raise your hand and let me know. So I figured I would just tell you how this book came into being and go from there. The reason the path is not linear is because, depending on how you count, it took at least 3.5 years and at most 20. As Lewis said, I came to this country from the former Soviet Union. I was 9 years old, and it won't surprise you to learn, maybe this is true for some of you in the audience, who learns English the fastest in an immigrant family? It's the kid. And all of a sudden, something psychologically traumatizing, but creatively nourishing happens, which is these people who until that moment were your guardians and your protectors and your assurers and your shelterers suddenly become dependent on you to steer them through a culture and a country that certainly that they don't understand, but certainly neither do you because you're 9. And that's what happened in our case. But at that point, you're sort of desperate to restore to their faces some of that reassurance and calm and comfort and guardianship that was there until just a moment before. And so you do everything in your power to satisfy that expectation. Among these, when I was 15 years old, I was given my grandmother's application for restitution from the German government for what she endured during the Holocaust. And this was really the first time that this woman disclosed to me what she had gone through during the war. Because this probably won't surprise you either, survivors don't really like to speak about what they went through. And she was, this described her as well. I mean, as a kid, there's a line in the novel that I really like, sort of my avatar in some ways in the novel is called Slava. And the line is, already by 10 years old, Slava had been visited by the very American understanding that it was better to know than not to know. And in that line contains all the a huge difference between Soviet culture and American culture. This is a culture of disclosure and confession and memory and genealogy. That culture was not, both outside the home and inside the home. This sort of notion that exists of the Russian kitchen table as a place of great candor and intimacy, not exactly. In any case, my grandmother was the perfect exemplar of this. She never wanted to talk about what she went through, and she rebuffed me, and I let her get away with it. But then finally, this opportunity arose, and she started talking. And a miraculous thing happened. I mean, in a Soviet Jewish family, or at least in ours, the younger generations, not only do they have to respect the elders as elders, but they also have to treat them as friends, which is to say, while they disclose nothing to you, you must disclose everything to them in the way that friends do. This was very hard to do with a woman who was absolutely remote to me. And by the way, she didn't want to know anything about who I really was. She was interested in whether I was eating well and what kind of girlfriends I had and whether I was making the grades that I needed. And so these disclosures on her part brought us together in a way that we had never experienced before. It really made us friends for the first time in our lives. But the thing that was the first piece. And the second piece is I'm looking at the application that we're filling out, which basically says, narrative, please describe where the subject was 1939 to 1945. And that's it. There's no requirement for proof. You don't, for the obvious reason that so much was destroyed by the Germans. The Soviets never released a great deal. And so this matter of history kind of came down to a matter of storytelling. If you knew how to tell a good story, you stood to make a fair amount of money. Now, it wasn't hard in her case because her story was true, but the thought that I had immediately was, it's only a matter of time before someone in my community, which is a community dubiously distinguished by its fondness for bending the law, has a field day with these applications. God bless you. The Russian expression is sneeze on the truth. And that certainly was because about a year after I started writing, there was a story in the Times big expose of the fact that a whole bunch of people were arrested in South Brooklyn for doing exactly what I had described in the novel, and had been doing it since the 1990s. It just wasn't found out until 2010. But the next question I had after sort of getting excited by this idea that storytelling is it. Sort of, there's no law here, there's no history here, there's no justice here, there's just storytelling and what storytelling can achieve. The thought that I had was, okay, well, clearly some people will, in my novel, will do this for just out of base motive, to make some money. But is there anyone who would have a moral claim to, legally, no question, anyone who forges restitution claims is guilty, in a legal sense. But morally, is the question ever more complex than that? Are there people who suffered, but not in the exact way they need to have suffered in order to qualify for these restitutions as they've been designed, who might have a moral claim to inventing stories of suffering so that they could get something that they deserved in a poetic sense but could not receive in a legal one. Because these agreements, it's not like they were made by God. They were made by human beings, by politicians responding to political realities. And they've shifted over time. They've become a lot more, eligibility has expanded a lot. So if you had to have been in a ghetto for 18 months in order to qualify at the beginning, that became 6 months over time, and that became 3 months over time. Well, what if you were illegal yesterday, but legal today, but you died in the interim? You know, what about all those people, who says that evacuees should get only one lump sum, but those who had been under different circumstances should get monthly payouts for the rest of their lives, and so on and so forth? You've got these people who have spent a life as Jews in the Soviet Union, which is a second-class life, Jews during the war, I don't have to tell you what that was like, and then sort of for the cherry on top, in their 60s and 70s, at an age when you should be sort of reaping the rewards of a life well lived, you get to immigrate to a country where you understand nothing for the sake of your grandchildren. And so these are people who are tired of waiting for life to start being fair to them. If anyone knows them, it's the Soviets, really. But the Soviets are not giving. The Germans are giving, as one character says. What is a man to do? Anyway, I don't have any answers in the novel, but that was the question that I wanted to present. So the kernel of the idea occurred to me in the early 90s, mid-90s. It took 10 years for me to write a short story based on the idea. Why 10 years? Because I don't have to tell you this story. I was part of a standard East Coast immigrant family. Among its aspirations for their only child, writing was not among the aspirations. In fact, whatever interest in it I had, I felt required to conceal and deny even to myself. But by a certain point in college, I don't know why I'm built this way. There are many kids, many contemporaries of mine, who have not found it indignifying to relegate their passion for something impractical to the margins and embark on very successful careers in more traditional fields. I could not do that. I could not be the person that my parents wanted me to be professionally. That became painfully apparent in college. But I was no hero either. I didn't even know what a fiction writer does at that point. I mean, does he or she go off to a shack in the woods and just sort of sit there until something occurs? That's as concrete as I could imagine it. So I decided to split the difference and go into journalism, because I figured journalism, fiction, it's all words, they must be kind of similar. And I was very fortunate to get a job at The New Yorker as a fact checker straight out of college. How did I do that? I cold called John McPhee. Everybody here knows who John McPhee is? John McPhee is a fabled narrative nonfiction writer who taught a class at Princeton, where I went for undergrad. He taught 2 out of 3 years and took 1 year off. With my luck, I had the 1 year that he wasn't teaching. I got some guy from the Philly Inquirer in his place who was just fine, but no John McPhee. I picked up the phone and I cold called him, and I left a voicemail on his answering machine. I mean, this is a legendary person. Just asking him if he had any ideas about about openings at the New Yorker, because why not? And to my amazement, completely spoiling me, because it set up this expectation that this is what happens in the world of journalism. This man called me back right away and said, well, I don't know, but why don't I call my editor at the New Yorker and find out for you? And I said, why don't you, Professor McPhee? Go for it. And he called, and it turned out that there were openings in the fact-checking department. I went to interview, and I have fluent Russian, which I made an effort to retain, which a lot of families that come here from the former Soviet Union in a kind of misplaced revenge against the country that did them so much wrong, they sort of let that fall away in the kids. They let their Russian disappear. I've had so many doors open for me because I speak Russian, and so anyway, I retained it. And that was a large part of the reason why I got this job at the New Yorker as a fact checker. And this is now 2001 to 2004. I don't know if anyone read it back then, but who wrote all the Russia pieces in the New Yorker at that time, and even now? David Remnick, the editor-in-chief. And so straight out of kindergarten, I was working with David Remnick, fact-checking his pieces. And by the way, the only mistakes that I ever made as a result were in David's pieces. And the only mistakes I ever made actually had to do with Russian, because I wasn't vigilant enough. I didn't double check myself as much as I should have, because it was the native language. In any case, I really quickly came to realize that journalism has nothing to do with fiction at all. I didn't know what fiction was like, but I knew that this was not exactly where I wanted to be. The shirt was one size off, if not several sizes off, by which I mean a couple of things. The first is that, well, first of all, I didn't want to be fact-checking anybody's prose. I wanted to be writing some of my own. And the writing that I was interested in was the writing that appeared in the New Yorker 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. The stuff where you could get, 40,000 words on Merle Haggard or whatever, and it read like a novel, I mean, that's the stuff that set me on fire. That's the stuff that I read in college. And as arrogant as this will sound, that's the only kind of journalism I was willing to do, which is only to say that my interests were elsewhere. Journalism had changed by that point, and with the internet and all kinds of other things, even in the New Yorker today, I mean, some people go so far as to call it a glorified newspaper, a well-edited Newsweek or what have you. Even the New Yorker, in some ways, has become more like a newspaper than a magazine. But at that point, that memory of that sort of old kind of 70s narrative nonfiction writing that appeared in the magazines was so fresh. It's what I wanted to do, and I got absolutely no opportunity to do it whatsoever. There was just no one who was willing to give a 24-year-old the chance to try his hand at that kind of work. And I got into fine publications. I mean, at 23, I published in the New York Times. At 24, I published in the Times Book Review. Like, all of that was happening from the beginning. But it felt like, first of all, long form was a vanishing opportunity. I'm talking about, forget 40,000 words, just 7. And also, stories that had voice, personality, those kinds of stories were assigned to a vanishingly small number of people who had proven themselves over the decades. And this was sort of explained quite reasonably. Well, why should a 24-year-old an untested 24-year-old get the right to try his hand at that kind of work? And I almost believed them. It almost made sense to me. So after I left the New Yorker, I freelanced for a couple of years as a journalist. Probably the longest piece I ever wrote was 5,000 words, and that was a book review. God bless the New Republic, or what it used to be, for running 5,000-word book reviews. In terms of personal essay or reported piece, I never got above 2,000 words. And it just feels like this is a completely random reference, but if anyone here has seen the movie Before Night Falls, it's about a Cuban poet who is gay and is therefore harassed in Cuba. And as one of his punishments, they put him in a cell that's too small for him to stretch out. This now sounds really grandiose, where I'm about to compare myself to a political prisoner. But it was just that sense of like not being able to open your arms. And it's hard to be really aggrieved about that and sort of righteously indignant, because I don't know what I'm capable of. No one's ever given me the chance to really try to hit it out of the park. Like, no one wants anything but singles from me. And on the one hand, you dream, is fiction different? Is publishing different? I mean, by this point, I had met some people in the media world and understood a little bit more of what it's like, but you never know until you're a part of it, right? And, journalism is already so risky and frightening. I mean, my first year as a freelancer, I worked 6 days a week, if not 7, from morning to night. And that year I made $22,000. And it's not enough to survive in New York. So this already feels like such a fragile foothold on adulthood and professional progress and what have you. And the thing I'm contemplating is to cast it aside and sort of lunge for something even less predictable and even less trackable and even less mappable, that being fiction. But I became miserable enough that I somehow found the ability to overcome the anxiety and do it. I applied for MFA programs. I got into a bunch, and I ended up going to NYU. The first year was so-so. The second year was phenomenal. There's a new director was coming in who really made an effort to clean house and bring in some fresh faces and people who were energized about teaching. There's a real debate going on about are MFAs worth it? The criticism of MFAs is they cost a lot of money and they churn out sort of cookie cutter writers, people who are technically proficient but don't have any soul. But the only problem that I see with this is that these programs are enabling people without soul to become decent enough to hoodwink some editors into being published. But the ultimate problem is that these writers don't have soul. It's not it's not the program's fault, it's not the program's job to teach soul and heart and vision, that's you. That's on you as a writer. My MFA program taught me so much. Structure, discipline. That was where I began to write the way anyone goes to work. I get up in the morning at the same hour that I would if I had to be in an office by 9. I drink a cup of coffee. I sit down to read for 2 hours. Then I sit down to write for 3 to 4 hours. And that has to happen Monday through Friday, and if it doesn't, it's not a good day. I started doing that when I was in my MFA program. I was taught so much by my professors in terms of craft and how you how you stop reading a book as a reader and start reading it as a writer. You start reading simultaneously for information, but also to go behind the scaffolding and understand that this was put together from nothing by someone and try to figure out how you might do the same thing. All of that happened at my MFA. But again, I need to stress to you how anxious I was this entire time and how unheroic this path was. Some months into toward the end of my first year in the MFA program, some friends started, it was an online startup, a hotel review site. And basically they offered me 6 figures to travel around the world and stay in different hotels and then write about it. Of course, I leaped at the opportunity, just so blithely casting aside this professional commitment that I had worked so hard to rise to. And if you can imagine, I had the audacity to be miserable, traveling the world at 120 grand a year, staying in fancy hotels and writing about it. I mean, at a certain point, you try to run away from it as hard as you can, and you can't find joy doing anything else. And you realize, okay, at least I've answered the question for myself. I've tried so many other things, and I tried a bunch more by then like this. it might mean that I'm going to be impoverished for the rest of my life. It might mean that I have to leave New York. It might mean that I won't be able to send my children to a good college. It might mean all sorts of not so casual things, but like, I'm too miserable doing anything else. I must do this. And so actually a huge weight was lifted off of me, because if you're going to suffer, the only thing that sort of makes suffering tolerable is if you're doing it for something you love. I wasn't willing to suffer for journalism. I was willing to suffer for fiction. That's all the information I needed. And when I got, of course I was fired from this job soon enough because I was too literary for the Enterprise. I knew there was doom in the air when my boss handed me a book. It was called something like Doing Without the Words, writing for the web. You know, I mean, they just wanted images. They didn't want any text. And of course, it was too late to re-enroll, but I re-enrolled, and the next year, and it was that in the fall of November 2009, casting around for something I could work on that year. I've never taken to short stories. I've got a writer's ego. I want to write novels. I want to write big books. And that was when I started working on the novel that I now hold in my hands, November 2009. I left the program in the summer of 2010. I was lucky enough to get a 7-month residency on Cape Cod that winter, where I nearly lost my mind because I was on the very wintry edge of Cape Cod for the 7 winter months. And I was surrounded by other residents who were handling it just fine, but I was not. But the one thing that these opportunities enable you to do is to keep working. You know, they give you a place to live, they give you a stipend, and sometimes they feed you, and all they want in return is for you to work on your book. And I ended up doing about 12 of those en route to publication. Even so, this took 3.5 years. It took 12 drafts, 8 of which were complete rewrites, and 4 of which were line-by-line edits. And the reason it took so long is because I had no idea what I was doing. In this novel, Slava learns how to tell a persuasive-sounding story because he invents these claims of suffering. I was doing the same thing off the page. You know, it's like we were passing notes to each other about about how to tell a story. And I just had no idea what I was doing. And I remember being so eager and anxious for a referendum on, do I have it? Have I got it? Like, am I at least, I understand the tree is tall, but am I barking up the right tree? And about 150 pages into draft 1, sending it off to an agent who perhaps over-kindly said she would look at the manuscript. And she wrote back too quickly to have read anything but a couple of pages and said, Boris, you yourself don't know what this novel is about, and you won't know until you've finished a complete draft. And when you've finished a complete draft, that's when you'll find out what the novel is really about, and you'll want to go back to the beginning of the novel and then write it over. When you're done with draft 2, let me know, and then I'll look at your pages. And that was terrific advice, and I share it whenever I talk about the writing process. You've got no business showing anything to anyone until the end of draft 2. Because draft 1 is to find out what it's about, draft 2 is to actually try to carry that out. But there were all kinds of other things that I had to learn how to do. First of all, I was coming out of journalism. Journalism teaches you economy, concision. Journalism teaches you observation. But journalism also teaches you, its emphasis is on information and analysis. That's its mission. Nonfiction analyzes and fiction renders. Nonfiction answers questions, unless we're talking about highly creative nonfiction, and fiction simply raises them. And I was so eager in drafts 1 and 2 and 3 and probably 4 to show you how smart I was. And like, hey, do you see what the novel's about? Let me tell you what the novel's about. Let me tell you what all these things mean. I just didn't have the self-control and the self-restraint to refrain from chewing up the food for the reader. And then you get to a point where you've looked at the damn thing so much, you don't see it anymore. And that's when you read in an interview, Cormac McCarthy saying, If your eyes have become glazed over, create a new document, new Word document, line it up side by side with your manuscript, and just retype the whole damn thing from scratch, all 100,000 words. That is, don't reread what you've written, but just retype the whole thing from scratch. It's a way of making it all, first of all, it's a far more active engagement with the manuscript, and secondly, it just completely freshens it in your eyes, and you end up cutting so much more than you would have had you simply reread what you had. And then there was a guy at this residency, our sort of supervisor, our administrator, who said, the best advice I can give you is hold on to your manuscript for as long as you can. I mean, even if you think you're up to here with it, there's nothing else you can do to it, show it to a trusted friend, show it to a mentor, show it to a former teacher. Don't send it in until absolutely everyone in your world has run out of ideas on how to improve it. Because it can always be improved, and you don't get that many chances, and so you better be out there with something that is just way better than even you thought you could achieve. And that was another part of the reason that I held on to it. But another part of the reason I held on to it is because after 6 drafts, I sent it out to 6 agents. You know, that's just a coincidence, 6 and 6. They have nothing to do with each other. All of them passed. All of them passed on the manuscript. This, by the way, is to go. I started writing the novel when I had an agent, and I sent him the first draft when I was finished with it, and his response was, like it was to everything I ever sent him, I don't see it. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know. I don't know if anyone here is in the process of looking for an agent or will be. This is not what an agent should do. This person is collecting 15% of your income in order to know what the hell is wrong with the manuscript. And if he doesn't, or she, they're not the right person to be with. I had been looking for a way to leave him for a long time, but never felt comfortable doing so because, like, who am I to leave an agent? You know, I barely got one in the first place. But this finally set me free. And by the way, the reason I went with this agent is because he was also from the former Soviet Union. And I thought, well, at least here we have some affinity. We'll be talking sort of from the same terrain, right? Well, the painful lesson is it's not ethnic affinity or national affinity that matters. It's editorial affinity that matters. So anyway, I wrote 5 drafts without an agent. I finally sent out the manuscript, got turned down by everyone. You know, some said, very intriguing, very promising, not quite cooked, let me know, future draft, what have you. Some didn't. I did 3 more drafts by myself. Meanwhile, you know, the years are clicking along just to set the scene for you. Everyone in your life is, so, Boris, still working on that novel, you know? People are buying apartments, people are getting married, people are having children, people are sort of knocking off the milestones of mature adult living, and you're still working on that novel and earning $22,000 a year because you only have half a day to make money because you spend half of it writing fiction. And you sort of prefer the time when your parents badgered you to get a different profession because now they've given up. They don't even badger you anymore. It's something very sad about that. But you're hobbling along, and after every draft, there is some miracle of a breadcrumb sort of on the floor for you to pick up and sort of sustain yourself for one more draft. A residency that agrees to take you on, an agent who says, you know, you're on the right track, whatever. And after 9 drafts, I sent it out again, this time to about a dozen agents. I figured, let me increase the pool to increase my chances. And clearly I'd crossed some hump here because 6 of them wrote back saying they wanted to work together. All the fancy agents passed. These were either young, there were 2 seasoned agents in this group, but neither of them was like a buzzy agent, and 4 young people. And I went with one of the seasoned ones because, as I learned, committing to an agent is exactly like committing to a romantic relationship. It sort of has to come from your gut. You have to be able to feel at home with this person. The reason that I ended up with the agent that I have is he is a super sharp businessman, but he also cares about editing. But even as someone who cares about editing, he is never going to touch my lines. That's too picayune for him. He's not micro, he's macro. But macro, he's very close. He will say, he'll go down to a particular moment in a scene and debate with me whether that character would really do that then. So that's like a micro within a macro, but he never touches my prose. And we also have scotch together sometimes. I mean, this is a person I actually want to drink with, and he drinks in the daylight hours sometimes. I mean, it's great. And I felt blessed. I felt like I'd paid my dues. I'd paid my dues to the cosmos, and I got this guy in return. And initially, half of this novel took place in New Orleans, because it was a very elaborate kind of high-minded parallel between Holocaust restitution fraud and reparations fraud after Hurricane Katrina. And I keep wanting to connect to this microphone. And Henry, my agent, said, Boris, I believe in you, and I believe in this novel, but New Orleans has to go. And so on the same day, I signed with an agent and lost 150 pages of my book. That I'd sort of tenaciously held on to through all those revisions because, the expression is killing your babies. That's, letting go of the stuff that's closest to you. And this one I just couldn't murder until Henry came along. And of course he was right, and of course that went on the cutting floor because that section was a journalist's product. It was flawlessly reported. I went down to New Orleans, I spent my time, I carefully noted all the smells and sights and sounds. But I forgot to give it human drama. It was just a recitation of facts in many places. It was completely dead as a narrative. And so getting rid of it made me go 150 pages deeper into the Brooklyn part of the novel, which enriched it tremendously. It was a little thin in places otherwise. And then Henry and I went through 3 more drafts together, and then he sent it out to, a dozen publishing houses. And the first one that got back was, what did they say? They said, this is too dark. And the second one that got back said, this isn't dark enough. And then the third one said, this is too richly written. The prose is too exuberant, too lush. And then the fourth one said, this is too simply written. And it wasn't until the fifth one, which was HarperCollins, that liked it so much they issued a preempt offer, which is meant to sort of take the book off the table, because a standard offer would sort of send it back to the other houses for bidding, and an auction ensues. But the offer is meant to be persuasive enough that you, and I did, I gladly signed on. Now, part of the reason that I mentioned some of those responses is to convey just how subjective this business is. And that is exactly why I love it. People are responding to you based on their best opinion. Sure, a lot of people worry about the bottom line, but when it comes to literary fiction, which is what this is, so little of it actually makes money for the publisher. Very often the best they hope for is simply to make back their investment. That these are people who are choosing what to buy based on quality and merit and their own best understanding of what they can get behind with the enthusiasm they would need to in order to just maim and kill on behalf of this book, which is what they would have to do in the marketplace in order to get it some notice. There's like 450,000 books published every year. That's all rejection notices say the same thing. I like so much about this, and I believe that they do, but I just can't get behind this with the enthusiasm that I would need to in order to sort of carve out a space for it in the marketplace. And you believe them. And it actually stings less. Maybe it stings less now that I have a contract. It stung more in the moment. But in this way, my experience of publishing is different from my experience of journalism. I believe journalism, as practiced currently in our world, could be an art. And I really struggled to find that reality. I find it far more frequently in the fiction world. And just to close out the story, this next is simply a piece of luck. There are many, many deserving novels out there why yours becomes the one on the cover of the New York Times Book Review, so much of that is just good fortune. I think the way it happened is the reviewer really liked it, and because the review was so positive and so glowing and so hyperbolic in its praise, they said, oh, well, it has to go on the cover, because sort of this reviewer had written about me in somewhat sort of elevated terms. There's some sort of satisfying moments along the way where, so the New York Times Book Review comes out, it becomes available like 3 days in advance for people in publishing, or 7 days in advance. But in this case, it became available to someone 10 days in advance. And the first person to have seen it, the book on the cover of the book review, was one of the editors who had turned down the novel. And she was the one who alerted my agent to the fact that it was on the cover of the Times Book Review. And her email was, the subject of her email was, eating my hat. And so you have satisfying moments like that. And I just want to say one more thing, that it's no accident that I've spent 8 months either here or on the road, somewhat ceaselessly promoting it, because I mean, if you have the kind of novel that for one reason or another, and really nobody knows why, so much in this business is unmappable. It breaks out and just like skyrockets, 50 Shades of Grey, you don't have to tour. Or you could if you want, but you know. But if you are the author of a literary fiction debut, trying to get this book in front of faces, there's no amount of pavement pounding that is too much. There's a woman named Carolyn Hessel who runs the Jewish Book Council who said to me, you worked on this book for 3.5 years. You couldn't afford to spend 9 months supporting it out in the world. I didn't really anticipate that Boris Fishman, the writer, would become Boris Fishman, Inc. And that really 50% of my duties now consist of promoting the book. I happen to be someone who doesn't mind it. I like talking to people. I like being in front of people. It's odd for me to be a fiction writer because I'm not an introvert. But you know, it gets wearying to say the same thing 60 times in a row. And you know, I've learned some lessons, and I'll be doing it somewhat differently in some ways next time. But this is what it means to be a fiction writer nowadays. You know, and a lot of people scoff at it. You know, that's beneath me. And it's a really lame perspective, because promoting your book can be far more creative than such people imagine it to be. Which isn't to say that it's always pleasant or easy. You know, when you're sitting in front of 8 people, 7 of whom you know, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Anyway, well, I got to be fair to Cedar Rapids. They actually had a great crowd in Cedar Rapids. It was actually, you know what? Cedar Rapids, a town of 150,000 people, I had 75 people in the audience. Los Angeles, a town of 16.4 million people, I had 8 people in the audience, 7 of whom I knew. Go figure. Anyway, I'll cut it off there, open it up to your questions about anything and everything.
Thank you, Boris. That was truly marvelous.
Thank you.
Boris is going to take some questions, and Annie will come around with the mic for you. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and then afterwards you can have refreshments, and Boris will happily inscribe a book for you if you wish. Who has a question? Young lady here.
Thank you. Were there any particular writers you aspired to during
Were there
your
any
development?
writers that inspired Boris?
Yes, and sort of like the way our foreign language classics have to get translated anew with every generation, your literary idols change with time. The first one when I was 19 was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because if you are lovelorn and literary, that's your patron saint, you know? But then in my 20s, when I was trying to, be a dude, it was Jim Harrison, if anyone knows that name here. He wrote Legends of the Fall. That's his best-known book. He's this kind of bawdy macho, ostensibly macho guy who writes about the Midwest and the West. Around the time that I started working on this novel, it became Bernard Malamud, if anyone knows him here. And if you don't, I urge you to get to know him, because he's phenomenal. And in my view, at least for me, far more moving than either Roth or Bellow, with whom he's always grouped as in this triumvirate of great Jewish American writers of the 20th century. If you are curious, the book to read is The Assistant. That's the one by Malamud to read. Malamud taught me how my characters should speak, because they're speaking in Russian, but I have to do it in English with you. But how do I convey to you that flavor of the Russian/Yiddish that's being spoken by them? So I did what Malamud does, sort of this gorgeously mangled syntax that he has, messed up punctuation, verbs and subjects reversed, and things like that. But even Malamud's time seems to be ending. I have moved on to Graham Greene. I read about 6 books by Greene in January, completing sort of my travels through his work. So it really changes, and they're all so different from each other. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, you change as a writer, change as a person. And you'll notice, like, not many Russians among them.
Well, this young lady.
That was great. Thank you.
Of course.
When you were talking, you were saying about something Russians are not giving, Germans are giving. What did you mean? The
Restitution. I'm sort of, as a character says, the people who probably owe us the most for what we went through are the Russians. But the Russians are not not as conscientious as the Germans. The Russians aren't offering squat. It's the Germans who are offering. I mean, is it my fault that the people who ought to be offering are not offering? These are offering, like, whatever. Like, I'm not going to stand on ceremony. They're offering, I'll take, Is that kind of logic.
Do you have an audiobook?
Yes, I do.
Do you narrate it?
No, I tried. I wanted to, but HarperCollins wanted a professional actor.
Oh.
They got that guy from Scandal, George Newbern. He did a great job, but I can't bear to listen to it because he mispronounces all the Russian words, and it's just it's not my inflection. So
Over there. You.
I just want to ask you if you've been in touch with John McPhee since that original connection we had. Is he taking credit for you?
So, very apt question, because for some reason, like 10 years passed, 13 years passed before I thought Joyce Carol Oates, who taught me at Princeton, was retiring, and I was down there for a tribute to her and telling the story to someone. They said, well, have you written McPhee a letter? And I said, no. And I went home and wrote him a letter, and he wrote me right back. And he was so touched and thrilled and apologized for taking 2 weeks to reply. I mean, the man is a saint. I haven't bothered him again. But there is here a very important lesson. So many people, when they sort of undertake this career, this pursuit, they're hobbled by 3 things. One is a fear of rejection. And the sooner you can get over that, the sooner you can just get real intimate with rejection and not let it stop you, that is the degree to which you will help yourself survive in this merciless world. The second one is they're really shy. They're really shy, and presented with an opportunity to reach out to someone like John McPhee, they're too shy to reach out to McPhee. That is a missed opportunity. I mean, if I don't admire an author, I won't reach out. It's not craven. But if you admire someone, I mean, do people here know who Walter Kern is? He wrote Up in the Air. He wrote a book called Lost in the Meritocracy about how Princeton is kind of a fraud, which I happen to agree with in some ways. And I read it, I devoured it, and I wrote Walter a message on Facebook, and very sincerely said, you finally put into words the things that made my time at Princeton so complicated and uneasy. And he wrote back, and he said, I'm so pleased. I've gotten way less feedback on this book than I wanted, but it was really important to me too. We became friends. He put a blurb, he wrote a blurb for this book. I mean, sometimes you build a relationship. Like, for example, Alexander Hemon. Anyone know him? Sasha Hemon? Incredible writer. Not interested in having a relationship. I still love him all the same, but didn't write back. But some do, and you end up finding a connection. And so don't fear rejection, don't be shy, and I forgot what the third thing is, but it'll come back to me.
Going once, going twice.
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when you said you read 2 hours before you start writing, how active is that? Are you, like, note-taking? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the reason I do it, some people don't like to do it because it messes with their own style. For me, what it does, it just sort of gets me abstractly hopped up on what words can do, you know? It makes me eager to try my hand at the same. So it's actually a great thing if I don't fulfill my quota for the day and toss away the book and run to the desk and start working. I always read with a pencil, always. I always write in the margins of a book. It's why I can't lend books, because my most intimate communications are with the books that I'm reading. I also, the other thing that I do is I will get up and go to the notebook that I keep for notes about my novel, which come to you at all times. Washing dishes, in the shower, you always have to have a notebook with you. And so something I'm reading will make me think of a solution for a conundrum I had in my own narrative, and I'll write it down. And sometimes I'll realize some craft concept based on what I'm reading, and I have a Word file called Craft Concepts, and I'll go and write it down there. Do I ever look at it again? No, but the act of writing it down sort of does groove it, trench it inside your brain a little bit more than if you just let it go.
Thank you very much, Boris. Why don't you join us in the back for
Yes.
some refreshments? Boris will be there. You can ask him questions, but he'll also inscribe books for you.
And I have an email list if any of you are interested in keeping in touch and finding out about my next novel, which is coming out next year. I'll have that back
I'll
there as
email
well.
it to him. Yeah.
What is your next novel?
My next novel is called Don't Let My Baby Do Rodeo. It's a very different story. It's about an immigrant couple in New Jersey that adopts a boy from Montana who turns out to be feral, wild, and they have to make a life with this foreigner, and meanwhile they're complete foreigners themselves and never miss an opportunity to make the wrong decision about what their son needs. So it's written from the perspective of the adoptive mother. I just really wanted to get away from the Russian Jewish male gaze.
I'll email him tomorrow.
I'm quite tired of it.